Alright, this is a talk about layering and detail. This is how I normally paint traditionally, which is odd because I don't do it in digital unless I'm doing something that's very close up and very detailed. What I will do if I want a lot of detail in a certain subject, if I want to zoom in, and I will do this as I would do traditional artwork. I would start out with a underpainting, mid-tone colors of whatever that object happens to be. That will be my base when I do this traditionally. I would start in with a transparent paints that I've usually thinned with a medium, which would make it even thinner, more transparent. And then when I do that layer, I would apply those paints, and the effect you get is you will see through those layers into the previous layers. It doesn't obscure it. It obscures it a little bit, but not a whole lot. You're able to see what's underneath it, and then you let that layer dry, and you go to your next layer. And since these layers are dried, you don't worry about these colors blending. You see through the layers, you see all the previous layers. What happens is your mind will blend these colors and give you this effect of depth. When I do select a color, you can see here on the right that I can turn down the opacity, or I can leave it at 100% if I don't want to see anything through that paint. And you'll see here that as I select a color, sometimes I will, sometimes I won't turn that opacity down. When I do, I will turn it down to around 50% or lower, depending upon how much I want to see through this layer. If there are details I wish to see, I can make it less opaque, or if there are some things I want to make more obscure, I could make the paint more opaque. This is what happens in traditional methods, where I would mix colors with my medium to thin out the paint to make it more transparent. Whereas in digital format, I can control the transparency of the color with opacity. I can turn the opacity down a little bit, and I will have a transparent color which I can apply, and it gives me the exact same effect. And the whole thing with painting in layers is that it's less likely that I will make mud, because if there are some fine details I want to paint, then I can paint very, very harsh detail on one layer, knowing that on the next layer I can obscure it, I can soften it, I can leave the hard edge if I want to. But this is one way, or one technique I use to be able to paint detail. Because if I were to paint on a single layer, then the likelihood that I create mud, especially since I introduce colors like blue and orange, they're going to blend. I'm going to get gray. It's going to be mud, and that's what I don't want. That's the whole purpose of this technique. Normally I work the whole painting at once, but for demonstration purposes I'm going to just do the one rock, because what I'll usually do is work on everything in the painting more or less at the same time. That way it's much easier for me to see the whole painting come together. Otherwise, if I spend a lot of time detailing individual things, it won't really look like a cohesive painting. It won't look like it hangs together. It'll look like a bunch of things put into that scene that don't really relate to one another. That's why I work the whole thing together usually. When you do paint in this way, you're going to have layers you're not happy with. They're not going to turn out exactly the way you want, but you don't have to worry. You can start another layer. You can correct color. You can correct different aspects of your painting through either obscuring something more or having more opaque paint over something else, correcting it that way, and you can continue on. I guess what I want to say is that this is a more forgiving or kinder method that you can use and not be so frustrated. Painting in layers, you can put in as much or as little detail as you like. The advantage of the layers is that if you're not happy with the layer, you can simply go in and delete it and start your new layer without having, say, in the traditional method where you would have, once you're done with the layer, it's dried, that's it. There is no going back. You're stuck with what you got. But fortunately, even in a traditional method, you can still correct any problems you had on a upper layer. But in the digital format, you have the convenience of going in and simply deleting that layer. Digital almost directly mirrors traditional method. Like in this painting of a rock, you think there's not much to a rock, but in the surface of any rock, you have this blotchy, mottled color. And how am I going to capture this? If I didn't paint in layers, then I run the risk of blending all these sometimes complementary colors together, and they're going to give me gray. Granted, the rock itself is a grayish color anyway, but there are times when I want these colors to be very separate from one another. I want it to be able to see where a color starts, where a color stops, without actually blending. Painting in layers allows your eye to just naturally blend these colors together when you're looking through the layers. You can take this technique to a much higher degree than I have here. This is personally this is the aesthetic that I like. I don't like to go too far with it until I get to a extremely realistic or hyper realistic look. I do like the painterly effect, but when objects become closer, you do have to get that detail, and this is the way I do it. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you next time.